the mountain range. And so here we have a complete lack of tall plants. So it's mostly cushion plants and different grasses and sedges that exist here. And these plant communities are not organized by coincidence. They are a community that is specific to, or that has plants specific to that climate who have evolved to the abiotic and biotic conditions for millennia in this area. And plant community composition is dictated by a number of abiotic and biotic characteristics. So obviously like how I just described, temperature, precipitation, and sunlight are hugely important in dictating which plants exist in a certain habitat. So in the White Mountains, it's one of the most harsh areas in the country, in the contiguous United States, because of its high elevation and generally low precipitation, being a desert. But in addition to this, there are a lot of biotic interactions that can change and affect the composition of plant communities just locally. So interactions between plants can range from facilitative, which can occur in really stressful environments like the Alpine, where plants are helping helping one another essentially to exist. And they can range from facilitative like that to antagonistic, where plants often their roots emit chemicals that keep other plants from neighboring close to them. So these relationships can really dictate what plants are neighboring around others. And in addition to that, plant soil interactions, whether or not a species of plant has mutualistic rhizobia bacteria or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that can facilitate in the uptake of nutrients such as nitrogen and other critical nutrients that roots have a hard time with. So that can really dictate where plants are able to be, and especially in terms of range expansion and contractions with climate change. And then lastly, our plant pollinator interactions, which is what I focus on. I am a pollination ecologist, I guess, generally. So I am neither an expert in pollinators or an expert in plants. So don't expect that from me, please. And but I know a lot about their interactions and the ecology of plants and pollinators. And these are really important interactions that occur because of the relationships that pollinators have with plant reproduction. So 87% of all flowering plants require some form of animal pollination in order to reproduce. And these relationships are mutualistic, as with plant soil relationships as well, in that plants receive, or that is, I should say, pollinators, or no, plants provide food, so pollen and nectar for bees and other pollinators, and in exchange, pollinators outcross pollen and allowed seeds to fertilize and further diversify a population's genetic profile. And how plant and pollinator communities interact and dictate their composition. So this is a figure from my qualifying exam that I use to kind of break down how plant and pollinator communities interact and how climate change can impact them. So in order for plants and pollinators to provide a mutualistic benefit to one another, they first need to occur in space and time. So for me, that means they need to be phenologically synchronous. I'm going to talk about phenology a decent bit today. So just to make sure you know what that means, phenology is the seasonal timing of biological events. So the timing of flowering or of pollinator emergence and foraging. And assuming that plants and pollinators can cohabitate in space and time, they need to be able to interact. So they need to be physically capable of interacting, meaning that they need to have some sort of compatibility in terms of the size and shape of the flower is typically co-evolved for or pollinator morphology is often co-evolved for particular flower shapes and sizes. And that can range from specialization where bees specialize on one single species of plant, like creosote has over 30 bee species that only pollinate creosote, or a super generalist like honeybees can pollinate a very wide variety of plants, even plants that are not native to their range, like those that are in the Western United States. And the interaction that plants and pollinators have needs to be mutualistically beneficial. So in mutualisms, there's always a push or a kind of a tug of war between plants trying to get the most reproductive success out of pollinators without spending a lot of energy producing pollen and nectar as a reward. And pollinators want to receive the most nutrients from pollen and nectar as they can, which in effect can alter plant reproductive success. So all of this is saying that their plant and pollinator communities, and especially pollinator communities, because they rely solely on flowers as their food resource, are very much intimately connected. And so climate change is, as I said, can impact plant communities in a number of ways. So directly, climate change, just through changes in temperature and precipitation, cause decreased access to water just through less snowpack and less precipitation. Also, greater temperatures can cause more evapotranspirative water loss, both from the leaves and from the soil. Which can ultimately decrease the rate of growth or biomass accumulation and cause death in plants. It can reduce their reproductive ability, as in the number of flowers that they're able to reproduce, and the amount of pollen and nectar that they can produce given the climatic constraints of water and nutrients. And a changing or climate change through shifting temperature patterns and precipitation can impact reproductive phenology in plant communities. So the timing of when flowers are blooming has been found to be very sensitive to climate change, and can also really impact their reproductive success through plant pollinator interactions. And plant communities are also indirectly impacted through their pollinator mutualists because they, like I said, provide or are able to provide less nutritious rewards for pollinators, and that can in end result in smaller pollinator populations. And this is a good kind of visualization from a paper from Jane Ogilvie and co-workers at the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory. That's just kind of showing how climate can impact bee abundance through floral dynamics indirectly. So that's kind of why I am interested in plant phenology, and why floral community dynamics, as I call it, has the potential to be very impactful for not only plant reproductive success, but pollinator communities as well. And there can be a feedback loop in this relationship, where a bad year for flowers results in less nutrients for pollinators, say in 2020, which ultimately results in fewer larvae and pollinators going into the next year. So this relationship occurs over a time and has lagged effects that can impact plant pollinator mutualisms even after a climatic event has ceased, such as a drought. So even if plants are alive or in the seed bank, they don't necessarily flower, and that in turn impacts the pollinator community. And like I referenced, this is especially true in the White Mountains of California, because it's one of the harshest abiotically harshest environments in the United States. It's the highest desert in the Great Basin. It has extremely low, or it has low precipitation, being in the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevada, so it receives a fraction of the winter precipitation that is currently blanketing the Eastern Sierra. And also extremely harsh, low temperatures in the winter, and generally low temperatures in the summer as well. I was there for 2 months this summer, and I don't think it cracked 80 degrees. So it's nice for me not having to be down in Bishop, where it was like 105 a lot of the time. But it carries significant kind of biomechanical implications for plants and pollinators in this system. And it's also one of the largest wholly connected alpine habitats in the contiguous United States. So it's a really breathtaking and but harsh environment. So with that, given the qualities of the White Mountains and the accessibility thanks to the White Mountain Research Center, I decided to start a research project there in 2019. And I have two main questions that I'm going to try to answer today, which is one, just how does interannual variation in climate impact flowering in the White Mountains? And then how does decreased plant density impact floral abundance and phenology, which I'll get into here in just a second. So now I want to kind of go over the different habitats that I have as the basis of my research project. So I have 3 different sites. They are, it's somewhat, I didn't name them very well in 2019 when I started, but the lowest site is site number 5, which is Subalpine. So this is dominated by Artemisia, and it has patches of highly diverse areas where Artemisia is less dense, and then it also has really dense areas of Artemisia where it's really just one of the few plants that exist there. And this subalpine site is also home to the famous horse of the White Mountains, Campedo. So I like to shout him out when I can. And then the next highest site along this elevational gradient that I have is at an alpine transition. So if you have been to the White Mountains, this is also known as the Gate. So that's where this site is. And it has some of the highest elevation Artemisia, and it also has a combination of subalpine and alpine plants. And it kind of represents the transition of being like this, the lowest elevation of a lot of alpine plants and the highest elevation of a lot of subalpine plants. And then lastly is the true alpine site. So this is site number 1. The transition, alpine transition, is site number 3. So the site 1 is the highest. And this has no shrubs in it or no Artemisia at this elevation. And it's the harshest climate with the most highly adapted plants for the really extreme temperature and wind that occurs up here. And they are, this is the only site that this summer it snowed there late in June and then again late in July. So it is a habitat that is also extremely variable throughout the year. So as I mentioned, I'm interested in studying how changes in plant community composition and specifically decreased plant density impact flowering, phenology, flowering abundance, and also pollinator behavior. So to accomplish, to answer that question, what I did is set up a biomass manipulation framework. So at the end of the 2019 season, which was my control season in the White Mountains, I removed 50% of the above ground biomass from half of the plots, and I'll show you a figure that kind of illustrates my plot setup in just a second. But what I did is throughout the control summer, I determined the coordinates, so the location within a 2 by 2 meter plot. So the location and down to 1 centimeter, the size of the plants and their identity, and I marked them with a toothpick so that I could track them in between years. And I estimated biomass using the sizes of the plants, and that's how I reduced the above ground biomass in the plants at the end of the 2019 season. And then I have been trimming them, or I trimmed them in 2021 this summer prior to flowering. So this kind of explains the plot setup. So each site originally had 3 paired plots. So I had to get rid of 2 in the Alpine because they didn't melt out from snow until the last week that I was there. So I dropped those. But each site has paired plots, so 1 control and 1 manipulation, and both of the plots flowered and grew unmanipulated in 2019, and then in 2021 I examined the differences in floral abundance and composition between the manipulated plots that have half as many plants in them and the control plots. So 2019 and 2021 were kind of unique years in the White Mountains for different reasons, or I would say they were kind of exceptional years. So in 2019, it was a really exceptional snow year, the winter of 2018, 2019. And there was a lot of late spring snow from what I understand, and that resulted in a lot of snowpack being still within and throughout the White Mountains for a long time late into the season. I was walking through snow to get to my Alpine sites until about the middle of July. And then in contrast to that, following my 2019 field season and the summer of 2019 in the White Mountains, the area went into an exceptional drought. So there's very low winter precipitation, and there's also very low monsoonal precipitation in the White Mountains for 2 years following the summer of 2019. So this is a picture at the same location and the same at the same spot along the White Mountain Road, just to show you the huge difference in terms of snowpack between the 2 years that I sampled the phenology in the White Mountains. And then this is just another look. This is a comparison at Sheep Pass between 2019 on the top here. You can see there's just a ton of snow. My Alpine site is up on Barcroft Mountain, which is this peak right here. And then at the same time in late June this year, there was absolutely no snow, even up on the top of White Mountain Peak. It didn't have any snow up there. So what this basically resulted in is 2 very different seasons, and the potential for a lot of variation and flower abundance and phenology, which I'm excited to show you guys here today. So first, I just want to talk about variation in climate. So I have some temperature data, but what I'm going to highlight here today is the difference in soil moisture and basically a difference in precipitation between the 2 years. So on the y-axis here is volumetric soil content. At each plot, whenever I went there, every 2 to 3 days, I recorded the soil moisture using a soil moisture probe. And these are the trends I got. So in 2019, as you can expect, because of the huge snowpack, the soil moisture was really high and then gradually decreased over time. And this little blip right here was the characteristically brief monsoon season that occurred in the middle of the summer in the White Mountains. And then in 2019, you can see that it starts off extremely low. So I have some data from 2020 that basically shows this trend of decreasing soil moisture from 2021, increases a little bit and then drops to about as dry as it can get, which is yeah, 2% or under 2% soil moisture content. So it started out extremely dry in the White Mountains, and it was looking like it was going to be a very boring year until July, when an exceptional monsoon season greeted us in the White Mountains. So it rained about every other day for most of July. And that resulted in a huge increase in soil moisture that wasn't able to impact the early flowering plants, but as I'll show in a little bit, it had a big impact on the later season flowering plants. So just to show you a bit of a difference between the control and manipulated plots, the trends were generally very similar in 2019. Remember, these in 2019, the plots, the manipulated plots were not yet manipulated. So this is just the natural variation in soil moisture between the 2 years, or between the plots. And then, as you can see, in 2021, it became much more consistent due to well, I suspect the very consistent rain patterns that went kind of north to south right down the mountain range. But the manipulated plots did tend to have slightly increased soil moisture, which potentially could be due to fewer plants being in the plots. Therefore, they're taking less moisture from the soil, and there was so much cloud cover and cool temperatures that the evapotranspiration really didn't have a lot of impact. Okay. So now I want to look at floral abundance. So we'll get into how the plants have responded to this variation in climate. So on the top here is the floral abundance for the control plots and the manipulated plots during the control year. So in 2019, and as you can see, it was really quite high and had a really lovely and kind of predictable trend, being that there was a peak during the warmest part of the season and tapering off in the beginning, and then also in the end. And then in 2019, it was much different relationship, or a much different habitat in the White Mountains. So as you can see, floral abundance was really hugely decreased in comparison. And while the manipulated plots did have a bit of a bounce back during the monsoon season, a pretty immediate response to the monsoonal rains, the control plots did not. However, there is an upward swinging trend that I wasn't able to fully capture at the end of this season. As you can guess, with a lot fewer flowers, there there's not an even distribution in the decrease of flowers. So some species responded differently than others. So of the 28 flowering species that I recorded in my 16 plots, only 16 of them flowered again in the 2021 year. So 12 species just did not flower at all in 2020 or 2021. So I just want to go through what these, or I just want to highlight a couple of these plants just to tell you a little bit about them. So this is Penstemon heterodoxus. It's an alpine plant that exists throughout the Great Basin, I believe, and it's very abundant in the alpine and kind of connected mats, but it flowered quite a bit in 2019. This is the floral abundance in 2019 in comparison to just having 0 flowers in 2021. So it had a very dramatic loss of flowering in my plots in the ensuing year. Another one, I can't see its full name, but because of the Zoom bars in my way, unfortunately. But this is another lovely little species of it's a cryptantha, and it's was one of the first species that flowered in the plots in 2019, and it was very abundant. And the plants have been continue to be in the plots, and most of them haven't died, but they have not reflowered again in 2020 or 2021. And this is, as you can see, yeah, one of the earliest flowering species. And next is Linum lewiski. So this is a really interesting plant, and it's really fairly widespread, and including being in the White Mountains. So this did flower, but it was very meager in 2021, and it didn't occur in any of my sites. So it just it didn't exist in the communities that I was documenting. Third is Luisia glandulosa. So this is just a really small little flower that exists in the more moist areas of the White Mountains, which is kind of why I suspect that it didn't flower in 2021, in that it likely requires a decent bit of soil moisture and precipitation. And there are also a couple, or there were a huge influx of annuals in 2019, and throughout the seed bank, which did not occur at all in 2021. So in either the manipulated or the control plot. So this is one of the little tiny annual species, and this is another one, Androsaci septentrionalis. Yeah, it's one of the thing, being having so many plants, and you read the scientific names, but you don't often have to say them out loud. So it's stretching me a little bit here today. But this is another really early flowering plant, and it wouldn't have these plants would not have or the seeds wouldn't have been around during or they wouldn't likely have been phenologically triggered during the monsoonal season. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at some of the plants that just did not flower at all, I want to talk about the winners of the White Mountains in terms of floral abundance. So here, if I didn't explain it, the ones that have both blue and green are plants that existed in both years at one or more sites. So this plot here, or this figure, kind of shows the difference between plants in manipulated plots and control plots that did bloom both in 2019 and 2021. So on the left side of this vertical line means that they produced more flowers than they than the number of flowers in past years, and on the left side here, and the negatives are species that produced fewer flowers proportional to the number of flowers that they produced in 2019. And for the manipulated plots, because I removed 50% of the biomass, which is roughly half of the plants in the plots, what I did is I compared the proportion of half of the 2019 floral abundance to these, so that we can see what it would be like if only half of the plants bloomed in 2019. So there are definitely some winners and losers in terms of who was able to, which plants species were able to flower in this kind of strange monsoonal season. And I think there are some trends that we'll take a look at right now. So the first species that actually excelled, especially in the manipulated plots, was Eriogonum avellifolium. So this guy was kind of he was the real workhorse, or this plant, not a male plant, but they were the workhorse of the Alpine this summer. So they had an increase in the proportion of flowers that grew, mostly in the Alpine and some at the Alpine transition site as well. And what is key about this species is that, as you can see in this was kind of the first peak that they had here, right in the beginning of the season. And then what would have likely been just a tapering out to 0 plants was instead a second peak, rapid growth of and production of flowers in response to the monsoonal season and the monsoonal precipitation. And that seems to be more acute in the manipulated plots compared to the control plots. Next is, this is a Pyrocoma species. I can't see the species name, but it's basically one of the dandelion species. And this again is a later flowering species, which is why I think it had it fared pretty well in terms of the proportional floral output in 2021 compared to 2019. And as you can see, this is one of the species where I think if I had stayed up beyond mid-August in the White Mountains, I would have been able to see a second peak and probably a rapid second senescence here as well. Third is this leptosiphon species. So this again is a later flowering species, and it had a really great abundance, up to 300 flowers in a day. These are just little bushes. Well, bushes in terms of what the White Mountains have to offer. It's just a little kind of little basketball-sized shrub. And they can produce like dozens of flowers per plant. So they were really successful in 2019 and still were able to produce a good number of flowers, more so in the manipulated plots in 2021. Another alpine and alpine transition species is Trifolium andersoni beetleiae. So this is a little cushion plant, or at least in the White Mountains, it takes the form of a cushion, and it's a little alpine clover, and it had a really consistent, nice phenological curve in the first in 2019 in the control year. And while it did have a kind of very late peak in response to the monsoons and in some of the plots, it didn't produce nearly as many flowers in proportion to 2019. Another species is this Oregamoni species. I can't see the species again, or Kingia, I think it is, which had a really beautiful phenological curve in 2019, with a clear peak in the middle of July. And in 2021, this was actually one of the species that I thought would hardly flower at all because the plants were kind of physically uh, dying, and they had a lot of dieback, but they were able to produce quite a kind of a comeback in abundance later in the season thanks to the monsoonal precipitation. And just some other species that did not really produce nearly as many flowers as in 2019, but were still present in 2021. So we have this really cute aster, one of my favorite flowers in the White Mountains, in a Rigeron species, and also some kind of funny, well, I think they're kind of funny looking plants. This one is, you can't really see it, but it's being herbivorized in this picture by a little Osmia species here that's it's cutting off sections of the leaves to likely use in its nest. And then lastly is some Alpine Draba species that I do not yet have identified as species, but they're very abundant, and these were kind of the real indicators of early season woes because they are very synchronous in their flowering and very brief in the Alpine. So they're an early flowering species and are very abundant for only about a week. And that week this year happened to be the one where it snowed and hailed in the Alpine of the White Mountains. So they had a lot of hail-driven floral deaths, I think, floral dieback, which was too bad. Okay, so now just to kind of show you one more visual of how the floral community has really drastically changed in the White Mountains. This is I have it running in a loop, but what this is basically a graphical representation of my plot. So the plots are 200 centimeters by 200 centimeters, and like I said, I have coordinates and dimensions and identifiers for all each plant. So what these points are representing are flowers, and the larger the point, the more flowers that bloom. So if you watch, it's about to repeat here. So this is the beginning of the season. You can see that generally it's much more abundant this is in the Alpine in comparison to this year, or to 2021. And that flash of red that you just saw is the Draba species that is really, really very synchronous. And just to show you a visualization of one of the Alpine transition communities, this is just the same thing with the X and Y coordinates representing the physical space of the plot. And then just one more of the subalpine. This one is the most notable because this plot 5 control 1 was the most florally abundant in 2019, and for the most part in 2021 as well. It was really diverse. This unknown one, it is identified now. This is an old GIF that I forgot to update. But yeah, so this just again just shows the physical variation and timing kind of from the pollinator perspective over the duration of the summer. Okay, so just to kind of return to my research questions. So first, how does interannual variation in climate impact flowering? So as I think was really clearly visible, there was a huge first, a decrease in floral richness in terms of the species that were able to that either didn't die or were able to flower, and that also decreased floral abundance, though as we saw, not across the whole plant community, but rather some were more more affected than others. And then lastly, it impacted the flowering phenology, as we saw with the kind of reverse trends in terms of late phenological peaks very late into the season due to responses in the monsoon. And then how did the manipulation of plant density or biomass impact floral abundance and phenology? So I haven't done the hard statistics on this yet, but preliminarily it looks like biomass is good for some plants and potentially worse for others. Like I said, my working hypothesis is that it alters water access, which could be variable along this environmental gradient. You may know that shrubs, especially sage scrub, can pull water from deep within the ground and have it more accessible to more of the cushion or annual plants in their surrounding habitats. So it's possible that hydraulic lift could decrease the benefit of there being fewer plants. But again, it still improved flowering throughout the elevational gradient for some species rather than others. So in terms of what I am gleaning from this for the consequences for White Mountain plant communities, this kind of dramatic change in floral abundance can obviously have a pretty significant negative impact on pollinator abundance in turn. I didn't share any data today, but I do have some data looking at how pollinator behavior responds to variation in floral abundance, and I collected data for that in 2019 and 2021. So I'm still working on processing that. But in 2019, there was a Lepidoptera survey, and I also conducted a bumblebee survey in 2019 as a part of a statewide effort to identify a bumblebee composition, and we found 7 species of bumblebees in the White Mountains just in within 24 hours at a single location near the trailhead to the White Mountains at the gate. We found 7 species of bumblebees, which was really incredible and kind of speaks to the diversity that is possible in the White Mountains despite the extreme climates. And the Lepidoptera survey, if I'm remembering correctly, identified over 33 species of butterflies and moths in the White Mountains during their survey. So it's really an amazing place that has great diversity, but also is facing really significant challenges, I would say, due to climate change. And the number one challenge is going to be the change in snowpack that is predicted to decrease by 48 to 65% by 2021. And what happens to the Sierra Nevada is in turn very strongly correlated with the conditions of the White Mountains being so directly in the rain shadow. But there is some hope for positive years like this year, where the Sierra Nevada snowpack is about 130% of where the average is for this time of year. So we'll just have to see what the variability is like. But I do have hope for the resilience of the White Mountains. Spatial shifts, uphill shifts in plant ranges have been documented already in the White Mountains. So there's some positive news in terms of plants being able to physically adjust to changes in climate. But again, this is an alpine environment, so there's only so much, so many places to go. However, the monsoonal rains were really on display this summer, are predicted to increase in intensity in the Great Basin and the Southwest in general. So again, it might be a scenario where greater monsoonal rains might have a really big benefit for the late flowering species that are blooming in the White Mountains. I just thought I would share some of a little bit of what the monsoon season looked like here. So this summer. So this is White Mountain Peak. I think this was January or June 28th. So we got a good coating of snow in June. And then, as I had mentioned, just a continuation of very large, intense thunderstorms for like the whole summer. So it brought a lot of rain in it, and you could really tell visually that it was very well received in the mountains. So in terms of future directions for my research, this isn't a complete research project yet. I'm still working on the results. So as I mentioned, I have a bit more. I have more work to do using the in analyzing the biomass manipulations effects on plant demography and phenology and abundance. And I'm also going to look into pollinator behavioral responses to floral community variation with the data that I'm still processing here. So with that, I would like to take a second to thank a lot of people. So first, definitely everyone at the White Mountain Research Center and for not only funding the parts of my project, but being really instrumental in the logistics of working at and living at 10,000 feet. The Inyo National Forest, I'd like to thank for the hard-fought permit that I still have for the next 2 years. I would also like to thank the UC Natural Reserve System and the Bristlecone chapter of the California Native Plant Society, who have also been really helpful in making this project financially possible. And in particular, I'd really like to thank Stephen and Tim and Dylan, Aaron, and Ron of the staff of the White Mountain Research Center for making my summers possible and a little more pleasant than just staying in the middle of nowhere by yourself for 2 months. And my lab mates, Andrea, Annika, and Chris, and a huge thank you to my field tech from 2019, Elizabeth Kenny, and Karen and Stephanie, who are also field assistants throughout my time so far in the White Mountains. And with that, I would be very happy to take any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Okay, we have one from Stephen Moore in the chat that says, what are the actual elevation of your 3 sites? I think in feet, not meters.
So the first, this is, I don't know if I have the exact numbers in my head, but the first is right at Crooked Creek. So it's about 10,500 feet in elevation. The Alpine transition is at 11,600 feet. And then the true Alpine site is at 12,500 feet. So it's just below Barcroft Peak.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Elijah?
In the meantime, I have a picture here. You can try to count how many marmots are on the shepherd's hut. I don't know when else I'll be able to use this picture, but I think it's really funny.
I see 3, no, 2. No.
There's at least 4 marmots in there.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, the marmots, I've had a long storied history with them so far in terms of vehicular issues. So yeah, it's a fun game with the marmots.
Okay, here's another question from Stephen Moore in the chat. Knowing that your research is still incomplete, but do you sense that the species of pollinators are the same or different for the varying flowers, early versus late bloomers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they're definitely specific to, in the very least, early versus late blooming. So there were the composition of the mostly like bees and flies was kind of noticeably variable throughout the year. Bumblebees, because they take time to develop the colony. They're kind of more active later in the season, and but you do see queens really early in the year. But yeah, there's also lots of other bees up there, and flies are fairly abundant as well.
Mike Mumford in the chat has a question. Have you considered using a stat pack to adjust for annual variations in rain, temp, etc., and also timing variations?
No, I haven't yet, but I am thankful for the suggestion. I'll write that down. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's interesting that you talk about the monsoon season this last year. Stephen had also made a comment that the conditions had improved up in the mountains because of the monsoonal rain we had been receiving. And it's really interesting because on July 19th of 2021, I had been told that the whites received 1 inch of rain in 20 minutes from a storm. And from that storm, it resulted in mudslides over Highway 6 and into Hamel Valley, which was, I guess it kind of puts into context how intense our monsoonal season was.
And it's predicted just to become more intense like that as well. And it was very dramatic in the White Mountains because we're so high up that the clouds are really just above you. So it was a lot of hail and rain, which likely actually had it's another potential negative impact on the flowers, because hail can be really damaging to the sensitive floral structures.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Elijah? Okay, this talk is being recorded and it's going to be posted onto our YouTube channel, and I can send out that link via email. I do have your email addresses on file from registering. I would like to thank Elijah.
I'm happy to put it in the chat here right now if anybody wants to email me your happy.
I'd like to thank Elijah for graciously volunteering to give a talk during our inaugural virtual lecture series. This is the second talk I have facilitated for White Mountain Research Center. And we're also hosting a rescheduled talk for David Lee. He was scheduled to give a talk on December 15th, and unfortunately, our stormy weather knocked out my internet at my home and I was snowed in. So that will be January 25th, and that link to register is also posted on our website at wmrcinfo.edu. And you can also find our events posted to our Facebook page. We keep that pretty active too. And we're hoping that Elijah will apply for another mini grant, so then I can rope him into giving a talk next year.
Yeah, I'll come back and I'll give you the whole rundown on the results that I end up with. So happy
Yeah.
to do that.
Any more questions? If not, we can wrap it up early for the evening. Everyone can go enjoy dinner if they haven't already. There's Stephen. I see Stephen. Thank you for all of your questions, Stephen. Okay, then I will send out a link for this recorded talk probably within the next week. So if you guys want to share or watch it again, you're more than welcome to. And so I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, and everybody have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.